Our next presentation will be delivered by Brian Kinghorn, who is the Emeritus Professor in Quantitative Genetics at the University of New England. Although it's not his official title, Brian is the guru and mastermind behind MateSel, who along with his son continue to develop the MateSel software, which is currently used across a very varied range of species. And I've just pulled out a few of the weirder ones here. But the same technology that we're using in sheep is being used in turkeys, salmon and canola breeding. Brian's here to discuss the complexities of breeding programs in needing to balance a range of technical, logistical and of course cost issues when making selection decisions. Brian will talk to us about how the features developed in MateSel for one industry are often taken up and beneficial in unexpected ways for other industries. And I believe there may be a couple of exciting developments you'll be sharing with us this morning. Thank you, Brian.
I can tell you it is a real pleasure for me to be here as I plug this in here. So just give it a moment. There we go. Well, MateSel started in the 90s with sheep, and it's really the crowning glory, I think, for us with MateSel because it's been such a success and we're very grateful for that. I think the industry is obviously thankful of such a professional team and highly competent bringing this to you through sheep genetics. It's a bit politically incorrect because in order to achieve that level of proficiency, they've had to throw the gender balance rules out of the window altogether. For me, it's a great pleasure to work with all these people. I was given this title of Balancing Constraints of Breeding Programs and Learnings for Other Industries Globally. So I'll be deviating a fair bit from the sheep side, but keep your mind open to seeing possibilities for where you might be able to use different components of that material in your sheep breeding programs. Okay, MateSel and sheep genetics, where is it now? And I can point, I think, with this. Yeah. So you won't be able to see that, but that's just an icon really for the sheep genetics interface, and that's where it is now. And what many of you will have seen, but not all of you, because it depends on when you did your training, is this is our desktop version. It differs in that it gives you interactivity, and I'll show you that just briefly in a moment. We are now in the process of moving away from this. This interface will probably last another year or so, and we're moving into a new interface which has got a whole bunch of different attributes which will have the database interconnectivity that you have with the current version that you've got, but it will also have the interactivity that we have with the desktop version. And we're in discussion now with a number of different high-level service providers like sheep genetics, breed societies and so forth for design of this and getting it to work so that it does everything that you need, and that's going to be coming up soon. We're looking to the end of the year, hopefully, before we can begin to have this being rolled out. So I'm going to be talking about new opportunities from other industries, but what I think I'll do, if I can switch over, and hopefully this is going to work. There we go. I'll just show you a little bit quickly about some of the interactivity and possibly at least one feature which you probably don't have in MateSel. So let me just resume this run. So this is just an example run, and it's building the frontier. And let me just quickly pause and just ask, would you mind putting your hand up if you've not seen this interface before, if you haven't seen this? Okay, so that's possibly more than half of you. So you'll recognize there's the frontier. This is just a whole lot of information telling you about how the run is going. I'll put up progeny inbreeding there. That's telling us how the progeny inbreeding is going. And here's your balance between genetic gain. You want to be high and you want to be diverse, which is over to the left. So this run can be interrupted. I can just click here and say I want to target this direction instead, and mates will run over there. I can look at print matings and see what the mate selections are, which will give you that solution. I can look at the sire use. I can say, well, there's quite a bit of diversity there. If I were to be more aggressive and go here, and therefore go for higher genetic gain, but I have higher co-ancestry, which means I'm going to have more inbreeding in the long run. It's a balance I make. Can update my matings and see that I'm putting all my eggs into fewer baskets, and so you're going to get more inbreeding in the long run. So that's the sort of interactivity which is, I think, going to be useful for you, because at the moment, if you don't like the result, you stop, go back and run it again. So let's look at, well, there's progeny inbreeding. If I do something daft and say I want to have high inbreeding, the reason I do that is I can illustrate to you that rather quickly we can see full sib matings resulting in high inbred progeny, half sib matings, and other things. And MateSel automatically works out where to put barriers in order to avoid, in this case, just full sib matings, and you can invoke that yourself. But let's move on from that and look at the example I was going to show you. I've just shown you a bit more, is manipulation of traits. Let's take yearling weight and say, well, the average of the candidates is this black tick. The current solution is taking me to the red tick. That's not enough. I want to be up here. Now, rather than putting a weighting, positive weighting on yearling weight in this case, we can do what's called tactical desired gains stabilizing. What that means is that when I invoke that line turns red, and I'll move up to there. The solution, you'll see the red tick moves up to where you wanted it to be. There's a compromise in the overall index, and that compromise is probably too much. So rather than stop and do a new run, we'll just say, okay, let's be less aggressive in that. We'll go back to, say, here and resume. So we're happy to go to that point, and we end up having very little compromise in the frontier, so we've actually made some change that we like. Here's birth weight as a trait of the lamb, shall we say. Well, let's say we want to reduce the variation in that. We don't want so many little ones and big ones. We decrease the variation and invoke that, and you'll see this distribution narrow down quite considerably. Again, at some compromise. That's too much compromise. We don't need that much reduction. Let me just put that down to a lower figure in the weighting. And the new version, will all be slider bars. So we've still got a useful reduction in variation in birth weight while achieving the target for yearling weight. And I think this desired gains is probably not available at the moment, although it could quite easily be configured to do so. And let's finish off with intramuscular fat and say that we want to go for bimodality, because we've got some customers we want to give a good experience. Some RAM buyers, for example, let's say 30% of our RAMs we want to target for high intramuscular fat, and the rest we're not so worried about that. So then we can see we get this bimodality that we have targeted, and we can just click that. If we want that to be a little bit more aggressive even still, I can click that and push it up there. So I didn't have to stop the run and rerun it again. You can do these things over and over. Now, this is all very quick. You won't get I don't think you'll get much bigger than that. Or maybe a bit, yeah. So thanks for that. So I wouldn't expect you to exactly follow all the clicks I've made there. The message to get home is that you see that you can manipulate the run and play with it and discover and learn what you can do rather quickly. You've also got marker management and other components in there. So we hope to bring that power to you. One thing which I'll just point out, I've been a little bit surprised that not many of you have realized we've got our own manual direct on MateSel.com, and this bit you're looking at, pages 2, 3, and 4, that's all the content. So we've got a lot of material in here. This here is all tips and tricks for doing things, how to get to do some unusual things like manipulating the patterns of ages of animals and so forth that you have in your breeding program. So that manual is very comprehensive. But a better way of doing it, perhaps, than looking in the manual is to go to our YouTube videos. You'll see them, just type in MateSel at YouTube, and we've got about 20 videos there to help you with worked examples and discussions around what sort of settings you should have or shouldn't have, and what your philosophy is and how you drive your breeding program. So there's that sort of stuff, as well as the housekeeping of how to use it. If you do get the manual from MateSel.com and you go to the end of it, you'll see a list of those videos and a description of them and direct links to go to them. That's all material that I think can help you in addition to the good material you get from sheep genetics with the specific manual that currently exists for the current version and the other support materials that exist there. Okay, so now I'll pull the plug on this, or you can do it for me. Thank you very much. Now, please don't read the words. This is just a list, and I think, do people have access to the PowerPoint afterwards? So you can look at the words afterwards. These are a bunch of different issues and features that have arisen from other industries, and that's what I was asked to talk about, the experience from other industries, and it also includes mice and dogs and all that sort of stuff now, and beans in Africa. And these industries have got their own foibles, and sometimes when we have to make something work in a particular industry, lo and behold, that feature is useful quite widely across other industries, and that's what I'm talking about today. So the red ones I'll talk about, the black ones I won't talk about, but you'll see that the YouTube videos have got the URLs there for them, so you just click on those. The manual download, you can click here, and the YouTube channel is down here. There's one which I realize, of course, actually came from sheep, so I put it green because it's not another industry, and that's managed distribution of males across SAR referencing scheme. And the one which I've talked about to a few of you, and I thought was possibly going to be a little bit interesting, but it seems that it's quite interesting, is that what we're doing for mass spawning fish, where you put a whole bunch of males and a whole bunch of females into a tank. The water goes milky, and then they all have a cigarette afterwards because they're quite happy. And then you end up, that's your mating. And so solving that problem solves problems for open pollination in some types of trees and plants, and also solves syndicate mating, so I'll be talking about that as well. Okay, target your varied customer needs as well as your own overall objectives. And you saw that intramuscular fat one. That's good for manipulating a single trait. But if you've got a certain type of customer who wants, say, high intramuscular fat, in cattle that would be the old Jap Hawks market, there are a bunch of other traits that go along with that, and you don't want to manipulate each of these traits independently. It's a whole suite of them. And so what happens here is that currently in your breeding programs, largely you've got animals that are born out of your breeding programs, and you've got decisions to make as to whether to use them in the breeding program or to cull them. And notionally, you've got a distribution of good ones and bad ones, and it's tending to be the good ones that you keep and the bad ones that you cull. But in most operations, and I think most of your operations, you're also disseminating out of that program. For example, you're selling rams to different customers who've got different end uses. It might be that this customer is looking for larger carcasses and this one's looking for smaller carcasses. It might be that this is someone who's breeding F1 heifers or whatever, and so their needs are maternal traits, so you have a different index for this class of customer than that class of customer. It could be that this customer is in a region where fleece rot is not a problem, so you're not worried about that, but this one is, so you're really wanting to breed rams that are not only larger carcasses, but are better for fleece rot or whatever the suite of different components is. And what you'll see from this we do is we tend to have the overall consensus for where you want to go in your breeding program is largely undiluted to drive your breeding program forward. But the tail of your breeding program, the animals that are still going to be used in your breeding program, but are probably not quite as elite, you are going to vary those in order to give you greater ability to meet your customer demands in the next generation out of the progeny. So here's an example of this being used for two different industries, the pulp industry and the furniture industry. And of course, when you've got a whole bunch of juveniles or whatever these things look like, you can sort them into those that are the elite ones for the nucleus, those that you can send off to the furniture and pulp industry, whether that's as seed or you're actually breeding another generation for that. But what we're doing is in the generation before, to make these progeny that you sort, we're actually setting up some division of the matings to target those outcomes. And we can do that in a manner that makes virtually no compromise in driving your breeding program forward for traits and diversity in the long run. And yet, in addition to that, at essentially no extra expense, sets you up so you're in a better position to provide, in your case, rams for your different customer needs. there are too many dots in this, on this slide, but I think you'll get the main message out of it. This is actually data from ABS Global in the States, who use MateSel for driving their breeding programs. And this is for two different end uses, so two different markets, like it could be large and small carcasses, but these are actually two quite different end uses because you can see they're not highly correlated with each other. So this is a graphic plotting the index for this end use for all female candidates, for the same female candidates, but for their index for the other end use. And I think the battery might be running out of this. If there are a couple of AAAs, that might solve it for us. Thanks very much. So MateSel has, in using the end uses feature, which I think is actually not available to you in the interface that you've got, but it will become available to you in the new interface. MateSel has actually divided the females, saying that these are the ones which we're going to use for actually, see that's disappearing again. Anyway, these are the ones that are going to be used for the one market, and these are the ones that are going to be used for the other market, and these ones down here are the culls. Now this is just the female selection here, and we do this also with the males, but of course as part of the feature, a male can actually be used in matings for both of these different end uses, so it's more difficult to show on a graph. But after we make the matings, which is blue to blue and orange to orange, the key component here is in the progeny. This up here says progeny. It's just off the graphic. You can see we've generated quite considerable division between these two. So we've managed to separate them quite well. So we're being quite specific for these different endpoints for these two different markets. You can get MateSel to do something which is actually more sensible in the way that it makes that division, so that the animals which are quite high meritorious here are not culled, while some down here, which are very bad for one of the end uses, but just makes it for the other end use, are accepted. So you can do something more sensible, and you can put more emphasis on the one and the other, but in the end, you manage to make quite a big division. When we bring this in with the nucleus matings, here they are, they're consensus, and you can see that these black ones are actually looking at the average of the two end uses. We want to be able to cover both of those for the long term. So there are the three end uses, the nucleus and the two end uses. They're all going to be matings in your breeding program, but you are engineering it so you're going to have a better ability to satisfy your customer needs. And if we look at the predicted progeny merit, that's how it comes out. If you're putting quite a lot of attention to diversity, you'll find that some females, and also of course probably even more so with males, are good for high diversity, even though they might not be excellent for the traits. They'll be slated as being ideal for nucleus matings in order to maintain that diversity. Whereas for your customer needs, you're not really interested in diversity for your customers because that's terminal use, and so you can concentrate on high merit for them. So you actually end up giving your customers a bit of a boost in their own respective directions because you are accepting slightly less meritorious animals because of their diversity value. So that's all part of the multiple end uses feature, and that's been quite widely adopted across industries. Manage decisions across the breeding season. Well, let's look at this one here with pigs. In typical pig breeding programs, you're making ongoing weekly decisions on a relatively small number of animals. And if we run MateSel on that alone, you've got very little chance for MateSel to get a good bite on understanding of management of diversity in the population because of that thing. We can think of it as like a big tail that's wagging the dog. This is very dominant. There are all these juveniles which are in the pipeline. And what you should be doing is that when you're deciding whether to use this boar or that boar, well, it depends to what extent this boar has already got investments in the pipeline because it's already been used widely. And that should inhibit its current use a bit more because it's in danger of contributing considerably to inbreeding. And it's the same for the brothers of that boar. If the brothers of that boar have been involved in generating that long line of animals, then we need to take account of that. So the way that we do this is instead of at the end here just including those individuals in the MateSel analysis, we take the whole, almost a year, it would be a whole year or a whole generation of information, and we run MateSel on that already. What we need to do is trick MateSel into using what we call committed matings. We want it to repeat the recommendations that it has made over the past year of weekly matings and recreate those matings again. But we're doing it all in one analysis. which means the active decisions you're making up at this end are taking account of all the decisions that were made before, and MateSel is recreating those recommendations, which is not allowed to change because, of course, they've already been made, and that makes better decisions at the end. And this not only gives us extra genetic diversity, but because of that, we can go more aggressively on trait merits and index merit. And this actually gives 20% extra rate of genetic gain in a typical pig breeding program, as well as extra genetic diversity. And this rather quickly was universally adopted across the intensive industries. It's actually quite easy to implement, and so that's been useful. For you guys, you're a bit like these people here. The tail is much shorter. It's not just 1 week of decisions, it's essentially like 1 year of decisions. And this issue for standard sheep and cattle breeding programs is not important. But I have decided to describe it to you for one particular reason. Let's get a little bit more relevant to sheep here. There we go. With salmon and prawns, it's a different sort of situation, which is actually relevant to some advanced programs, and I'll touch on that in a moment. So I can walk around here. So what's happening here? We've got this same tail where you've got all the juveniles in the pipeline, and we do accommodate those. But we've got a mating season which goes from here through the current time right into the future. And we're talking probably here about a period of weeks or something in salmon or prawns. And if you've got a salmon in ponds, you've only got a few males every week or every day or whatever it is that are ripe. So you pick out those males and you pick out those females and you strip them and you make your matings. And that's what you're going to do today. We're going to decide today how we're going to do our selections and matings out of those that are available that are coming today. In the previous days and weeks, we've already been doing this, and we've already got those matings made. So these are actually going to be treated as committed matings. So committed matings actually goes right into the present time. And that means that we can make sensible decisions today based on also what is there today, but also what you've already done in the season, as well as what's in the pipeline all the way in the past. But importantly, what you do today depends on what you think you'll do in the future. So when people do this, they actually make groups out of the animals that are still in the ponds, not mature and ready to use, but the MateSel is making selections and dummy matings that you're not going to act on, but they're sitting there. And that means that the decisions that you make today are contingent also on what you think you'll do in the future. And so this was all for aquaculture. This is how it's done in progressive programs. But then actually a beef breeder in the States pointed out to me that this actually is relevant to what they're doing, because they're doing reproductive technologies. They might be doing multiple, flushings. They've got semen in the can, and they want to use semen right throughout a season. So if you're doing moat and jivet, or if you've got some kind of a program potentially where it's like ram circles that they've got in Scandinavia, where you're sending rams from farm to farm to be used, you don't want to use all your best rams and use them all up right here, such that recommendations down the track, don't use that, you've used it too much, don't use it, you've used it too much. You want that to be rationally spread across the whole breeding season. And that's why this approach here is useful for those sorts of operations that are using those sorts of technologies. So for the majority of you, probably not important, but very often we find that when people see what we're doing in other species, they'll say, hey, wait a minute, what about me? And that's one of them. That was where I was going to do the demonstration, but I think it was relevant earlier, so I did that. So I'm going to finish off now with mass spawning fish, and I mentioned that briefly about the problem of particularly in tilapia. It happens in sea bream, sea bass, just because of the biology of the fish. You can't go and strip them. They've got to do their own mating dance thing and so forth, and so mass spawning is there. It's also true for some plant species where you can actually use pollinators, and you have certain plants in proximity to others, and very often that's done just like single sire joining with one genotype of plant, should we call it, mating with another using bees and so forth. But there is value in managing genetic diversity and cross-classified matings and so forth in having multiple different plants with open pollination. So we're beginning to talk to a couple of groups about that. But most of us do single sire joining, and I thought I was going to be unpopular suggesting that there's other ways of doing things, but maybe not. And the way that people who have done this, and one or two of you have that I've spoken to, is essentially run MateSel like this to get your single sire mating groups, and then actually make groups of the bulls, of the rams, together with the recommendations that they had for the females. And of course, the problem with that is that although this bull is a good match for these cows, it may not be a good match for these cows. And when you put them all together, that may not be optimal. And a lot depends on how you group your, syndicate your rams, basically. So this is coming to MateSel. We're going to be able to do multi-sire joining so that we have MateSel deciding on which individuals go into the male syndicates. You can pre-decide your females. You can pre-decide your female. Let me just go to the next slide, actually. You can pre-decide what your groupings are for the females, or you can let MateSel do it for you, which will be more optimal, but it's more work for you to put them in. You've got to go and do all the sorting. You can also pre-decide them, but MateSel will tell you which ones to cull out of these different groups. So that's all going to be optional. And you can have different sizes of syndicate groups. You declare that. And the important things here are not, is that this is all done simultaneously. So what is the best way to put together a syndicate group depends on the way that you put in the syndicate group on the other side of the fence. And it also depends on which groups of males you're going to allocate to which groups of females. And so the whole thing has to be done simultaneously. And the machinery that we've got in MateSel is ideal. It's already set up for doing this. So we make an extension to MateSel so you can do multi-sire joining, and you can do mixtures of single sire and multi-sire joining within the same analysis. It doesn't exist now. We're now at a stage of collaborating with people and consulting with people, including people like yourselves. And if anyone's got any particular ideas about, I hope that they cover this situation when they make this thing. Well, if you've got that in your head, email me or email Sheep Genetics, put the question, and we'll address that in development. So when this is done, this whole thing, as it is already done, is driven not by looking at the parent animals and how good they are. It's driven by looking at the prospective progeny and the outputs in the progeny. That's how MateSel works. You can actually ask to look at the attributes of the sires and dams. I don't think anyone's doing that, but if you look at some of our videos, you can see how you can actually do that. But by and large, by default, MateSel looks at what the outcome is and messes with that, rather than messes with the actual parents and thinking about how good they are. It's exactly the same here. What we're looking at is the outcome of all these things, and that's what's driving it. And that outcome drives back to the creation of groups and the allocation of groups. And we then get optimal contributions, as you see on the frontier. That'll be there. You can manage progeny inbreeding. If you make progeny inbreeding important in this scenario, then you will tend to get groups of related males and groups of related females and allocation of unrelated groups to unrelated groups. But progeny inbreeding is only one of many issues that are important. So you might be looking at genetic defects if you're probably in some cattle breeds, and to some extent trait distributions. Also, we will make it so that you can be targeting different suites of traits in the different mating groups. So you could be having your large carcass, small carcass, maternal output using this multi-sire feature as well. It's actually going to be rather simple to implement. So the trait manipulations, multiple N groups, and we're going to have the ability for you to take account of the fact that you might not want to be mixing old rams with new young rams, and if the demand is there, we put in some kind of temperament score or whatever that you can manipulate to help you to engineer that your groups of rams you think will work out well together and not be fighting with each other too much. So the upsides for that, of course, in fewer mating paddocks, fairer management group effects, because instead of having very many management groups, you'll have fewer of them, and that the progeny of individual bulls don't have different environments, through the mating component and how that comes through in maternal effects. So there's a potential for better genetic evaluation there, possibly better fertility. You'll all have ideas about that, whether that's true or not. The downsides are the dominant male effects, and so you have to really account for this in your diversity policy. You will get less diversity than you think, because these things are not going to equally contribute to the progeny, of course. You need to father up as well as mother up. Although we have a number of clients who do not use pedigree at all. It's totally genomic. They don't use the genomics to work out what the mum and the dad is and use the pedigree. They just use genomic relationships, as somebody was saying. We handle that in MateSel. And of course, you've got less overall control. But for those of you who are already doing multi-sire joining, we feel that we can bring you a more rational technical basis for doing this and better level of control. And so that should be better. We wouldn't suggest, although it may happen, that it might push some of you towards multi-sire joining if you feel that this actually starts to give you a bit more control using this approach than what might have been a little bit more of a seat of the pants approach before, although it might have been rather good. So that's there as well. So that's me coming to an end there. There it is down here at the end. If you look in our support materials, which are freely available through MateSel.com, in addition to what you get from sheep genetics, you might find going through that there'll be a few aha moments and thinking, well, that actually applies to me, I can use that. And there are a whole bunch of videos there if you find the time. They're all between 5 minutes and maximum probably about 18 minutes. We try and keep them small. You'll find in the new version that we're talking about, you're going to have bite-sized videos so that when you're entering information, you'll be able to click and get a 1 or 2 minute video on certain components to help you through the process of assembling mating groups and all that sort of stuff. So we're really aiming with the new version to make it much simpler, as simple as it can be and as complex as it needs to be for your particular level of use. And that's all controlled through the service provider, in this case, Sheep Genetics. So we hope that makes for quicker training and quicker uptake each new year, because it's a year since I used this thing. How does it work? We hope to make that a nicer experience for you as well. So that's me done. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Brian. I know I took a few photos of slides then of things that I'll be going back and revisiting. So it's great to hear what we've got coming and we'll have available for sheep genetics breeders. In terms of questions, we've got one here. So for other industries, MateSel's been for the other industries MateSel has been used in, what have been some of the learnings we can take into sheep? And I know you touched on a few there at the end, but do you have a favourite?
I think the favourite for me is how to run an industry. For us, sheep genetics is an icon of how to do this sort of thing. And when we go and speak with different breed societies and so forth, and we're going to spend a month in the States doing that sort of thing coming up, it's a great thing for us to point them. So this is how it can be done. And that's the biggest learning, I would say. There probably are some technical learnings, and I would say a lot of it is just the fundamental stuff of MateSel, because it all grew out originally of working with Rob Banks. It was originally called MateSel in the 1990s, then we moved over to TGRM, and we came back with the MateSel word, and a lot of the ground roots development was with sheep, and working directly with some of the people in this room as well. You know.
Fantastic. So the next one we probably touched on, but feel free to provide some comment on. Will the new MateSel functions that we've discussed today be available in our sheep genetics version?
Absolutely. It will be possible for sheep genetics to switch things off or control things. The number of traits that you can handle is infinity. For example, but there are good reasons that you're doing that. So I'll just touch on a couple of things there. One is that whenever we see that something unusual has happened, and we can detect that automatically in our system, we will have the facility for sheep genetics to be sent an email about this particular run warning, and then whether you want to click that off as a user or that's certainly optional. The multiple trait thing, there is a challenge there with people using too many traits and so forth. I looked at 3 things there. The dairy people, they have 30 things up there, and they manipulate a lot of them because they're targeting getting trait leaders for different components in different parts of the market. So they're not really necessarily all driven by index. they're looking to position themselves in the seed stock marketplace in particular ways. So the box is open as far as we're concerned, and it's a question of guiding users to the most efficient use of it, which is largely in your own hands.
I will just add one other point to that is part of the database redevelopment was previously we were a little bit limited in the system we were using at our end too. So since we've been able to deploy our new database, we've been working with Brian and Sandy on what that new interface looks like, just to keep some consistency too between the different versions that are out there. And it will also mean that as updates are made by Brian and Sandy, we'll be able to bring those through more automatically than we can at the moment.
In fact, it'll probably be fully automatic because everyone everywhere will have a new version the way that we're looking at rolling it out immediately.
One that you just touched on, but we might expand on further. Brian, can you provide your insights and explain why indexes are important in MateSel, and can you draw on any other industries?
Well, you could turn the question around and say, can you explain why indices are unimportant using examples from other industries? And the poultry, for example, it's difficult to explain exactly why, but they're highly driven by desired gains. They use desired gains tools and MateSel, because tactically you use it in MateSel, you can change things directly, but they develop their strategies as well. They develop their indices by looking at what is possible to happen. So if you make a selection index that says you're going from here to there, that's the best direction to go in. But when you use desired gains, you might, for example, find that you can go in a slightly different direction, but out here, as I said to someone the other day, and that might be a better place to be than this, because when you do the index calculation, it doesn't necessarily take account of the fact that you can go further in certain directions. And also, the information used to make the indices is sometimes not complete. And as a seed stock seller, you know that you can't sell rams that are of this particular type. We need something out here. And so as long as you're on top of what you're doing, and I think most of you people are, you can break the rules. But the important thing is you can break the rules in a manner which you make a minimal, ideally, compromises in the index. And you saw there, we were looking at how the dot went away from the frontier. It came down from the gain in index was reduced. And you make a judgment as to what's acceptable given that you're getting what you want and have the index. That probably covers that.
Fantastic. We'll just take one more. There are quite a few questions here, but Brian is around in the break, so happy. I'm sure we can form a line and start asking the questions. But we'll go with the top one here, which is, will the committed matings allow simultaneous selection for AI and ET matings, as well as backup RAM allocations in a single run?
Yeah, it is possible to do those things without committed matings, but committed matings is quite sensible in many practical situations. One I was discussing in the other, or it's actually in our handout if anyone's got that for the multi-sire joining thing. One way of doing the multi-sire joining, for example, and it's a little bit similar to this, you could think of that as like an elite, an AI, ET type things, is to do your single sire matings, lock them in, and then put them into the analysis for the multi-sire joining as committed matings, because you've committed that. You want to make your multi-sire joining, which might be a little bit more towards dissemination or multiplier, you want to make those decisions in the light of what you've already done or already decided, so you can lock in your single sire matings or your AI and ET and GIVIT matings. You can lock those decisions in and then run a new analysis, marginal, but taking account of what those decisions are. Ideally, you do the whole thing simultaneously so that what you do at the multiplier level or the multi-sire joining level actually impacts on what you do at the single sire mating level. But for practical reasons, it might be better to do it that way around. So yes, committed matings can be used in a number of ways. If you look at our video on using committed matings, you'll probably get some insight there.
Oh, fantastic. Please join me in thanking Brian Kinghorn.